I am Kim Jackson, 24 years old, a psychologist from Florida. The moment I caught him with her, the world didn't just stop. It cracked open, spilling out everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and myself. It happened in my own apartment, on a humid Tuesday evening when I came home early from work. I remember the way the air conditioner hummed faintly as I turned the key and pushed open the door, holding a bag of groceries in the silly excitement of surprising my boyfriend, Eric, with his favorite dinner. But surprise was waiting for me instead. The first thing I saw were her shoes, red heels, tossed carelessly near the couch. Then I heard her giggle, and Eric's voice low and familiar saying, "You're so much fun, Chloe." I didn't even realize I'd dropped the grocery bag until the sound of breaking glass jolted me back. They turned, half-dressed, shocked, frozen. And in that one instant I saw not guilt, not regret, but fear. Fear that I had caught them, not fear of losing me. "Kim," Eric stammered, stepping forward. "It's not what it looks like. Don't," I said, my voice shaking but sharp. "Don't you dare insult my intelligence." Chloe, my supposed best friend, pulled the blanket tighter around herself, muttering, "It just happened." That was the line that broke something inside me. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was a psychologist who spent her days helping others rebuild after heartbreak. Yet here I was, watching my own life crumble like a case study gone wrong. Eric tried to follow me as I left, but I slammed the door behind me and didn't stop walking. I walked for blocks, past glowing storefronts, through the heavy Florida air until I found myself on the beach, barefoot and numb. The waves rolled in like they were mocking me, calm, steady, merciless. I sat on the damp sand and stared at the horizon, wondering how love could turn so poisonous, so fast. The truth was, the signs were always there. Eric's sudden late nights, Chloe's constant curiosity about my relationship, my own gut feeling that something wasn't right. But I ignored it, because I wanted to believe I was the exception, not another woman in a story of betrayal. Now, I was the story back home. I found my reflection in the mirror, eyes red, hands trembling, face pale. And beneath all that hurt, I saw something else rising, something sharp and alive. Anger, not the reckless kind, but the kind that thinks, the kind that plans. That night, I blocked both of them, deleted our pictures, and I made a promise to myself. Not just to move on, but to rise so high that the next time they saw my name, they'd feel it in their bones. They took my heart. I'd take back my power. The next morning, I walked into my clinic like nothing had happened. But every client who sat across from me, every tear I wiped, every word of advice I gave, felt heavier, truer. A woman came in that day crying over a man who left her for someone younger and prettier. I listened to her pain, but for the first time, I didn't just empathize. I understood. People betray out of weakness, I told her quietly, and weakness always collapses on itself. Your job is not to fix them. It's to heal yourself enough to never go back. She smiled faintly, her eyes meeting mine. "You sound like someone who's been through it," I smiled back. "I have." The days turned into weeks, and I buried myself in work. I took on more clients, volunteered at the trauma center, and started writing articles online about self-worth and recovery. Each post gained more traction than the last. Women from all over commented, shared, thanked me for saying what they couldn't. One morning, I woke up to an email from a wellness magazine offering to feature me in their Voices of Healing column. That same afternoon, Chloe called from an unknown number. I answered out of instinct. "Kim? Please don't hang up," she said quickly. I wanted to say I'm sorry. Eric and we broke up." I said nothing. "He said I'll never be you," she continued, her voice cracking. "He said you're the one he should have chosen." For a brief moment, I felt the old ache stir, the one that wanted to hurt back. But I didn't, because something inside me had changed. "I hope you find peace, Chloe," I said, and hung up. When I looked at myself in the mirror again that night, I didn't see the broken girl from before. I saw a woman rebuilding herself. Quietly. Fiercely. And somewhere deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. In the weeks after Eric and Chloe's betrayal, I thought time would numb the pain. But betrayal doesn't fade quietly. It echoes in every conversation, every memory, every small reminder that life goes on even when yours feels like it stopped. As a psychologist, I was supposed to understand healing. I taught people how to move on, how to forgive. But when I looked in the mirror each morning, I saw a contradiction. A woman preaching peace while burning with rage underneath. At work, my coworkers had started whispering. News traveled fast in our small Florida clinic. Chloe had been my best friend, a nurse who sometimes referred clients to me. And when she suddenly stopped coming to the office, people noticed. She ran off with Kim's boyfriend. I overheard one of the interns whisper by the coffee machine. The other chuckled. Damn, that's cold. I walked past them silently, pretending not to hear, but their words cut deep. They weren't mocking Eric. They were mocking me, the girl who should have known better. Those whispers became my daily background noise. The pitied glances, the forced small talk, the sympathetic half smiles, all of it was worse than being ignored. It was humiliation disguised as concern, and Eric, he moved on like nothing happened. His social media showed him and Chloe smiling at a beach bar, her arms around him, his caption reading, "Sometimes you find love where you least expect it." That post had over 200 likes. I threw my phone across the couch and sat there trembling, not from sadness, but fury. One Friday afternoon, my supervisor, Dr. Melendez, called me into his office. "Kim," he said gently, "I heard what happened between you and Chloe. I just want you to know I understand if you need some time off." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, sir. Work helps." He nodded, then added, "Still, be careful with personal relationships at work. They can complicate things." That sentence stayed with me long after I left his office. Be careful with personal relationships. As if this betrayal was somehow my fault. As if being loyal, trusting and honest made me careless. That day, I decided something quietly. I'd never again let anyone make me feel small. The injustice didn't stop there. A few weeks later, I discovered that one of my research articles, a piece I had been working on for months about trauma recovery, had been submitted to a professional journal under someone else's name, Eric's. He'd taken my draft. My notes, my work. I confronted him outside the community center where he volunteered. He looked startled to see me but quickly recovered, flashing that same charming smile that had once melted my heart. "Kim, I can explain." "Explain what?" I snapped, stepping closer. "You took my paper and published it as your own. How could you?" He shrugged, hands in his pockets. "You left your laptop unlocked the night we, I thought you weren't going to submit it anyway." I stared at him, speechless. He tilted his head. "Besides, your name carries less weight than mine in that field. Let's be real, babe. I did you a favor." That word, babe, hit me like a slap. I took a breath, every part of me trembling with controlled rage. "You didn't just steal my work," I said quietly. "You stole my voice," he smirked. "Guess you should have spoken louder." That night, I sat alone on my apartment balcony, staring at the city lights. The betrayal had layers now, personal, professional, emotional. They didn't just cheat on me. They erased me. But what they didn't realize was that you can't erase someone who's already rebuilding. A few days later, I received an invitation to a psychology conference. Ironically, Eric was one of the featured speakers, presenting my research. I almost didn't go. But something in me, that quiet fire that had been burning since that night, told me I had to see it for myself. When Eric walked onto that stage, his voice confident, his posture smug, I felt sick. He quoted lines I'd written, used metaphors I'd crafted. People clapped. They admired him. But then, halfway through, he faltered. Someone in the audience raised a hand. Dr. Wilson, this paper sounds remarkably similar to one being drafted by a Miss Kim Jackson. Are you two collaborating? The room fell silent. Eric hesitated. Yes, of course. She helped with some minor details. Minor? I said loudly from my seat. Heads turned. He froze. I wrote that paper, I said, my voice steady. Every word. Every study. And you know it. Gasps rippled across the auditorium. Eric's face turned pale. Kim, that's not... Finish your speech, I said calmly. Let's see how well you can explain research you didn't conduct. He couldn't. Within minutes, his presentation crumbled. His confidence shattered. I walked out before the applause ended. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I'd already taken it without trying. Still, the damage was done. My name wasn't cleared publicly. Eric faced no official consequences. The injustice continued quietly, like a stain you can't wash out completely. But it taught me something valuable. Success wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about becoming so undeniably great that their lies couldn't survive in your light. So I went back to work. I doubled my hours. I started hosting free mental health workshops in underserved neighborhoods. I built my credibility piece by piece, brick by brick. People who once whispered behind my back started asking for my advice. Invitations to panels came in. My articles gained traction online. Eric and Chloe? They disappeared from the spotlight. Because that's what happens when your story depends on someone else's downfall. Mine, on the other hand, was just beginning. By the end of that year, I stood in front of a full classroom at the University of Miami, teaching my first lecture as a guest professor. Looking at those eager faces, I realized I wasn't teaching psychology. I was teaching survival, because life doesn't hand you justice on a silver platter. You carve it out yourself. One decision, one small victory at a time, and I intended to carve mine so deep, they'd never forget my name again. I thought I was past the worst of it. I really did. After months of silence, professionalism, and relentless focus, I believed I had built a wall between myself and the pain. But betrayal doesn't just vanish. It hides under the surface, waiting for the smallest crack to crawl through. And mine came on a Wednesday morning, when my name was left off the annual recognition list at the clinic. My team had nominated me for the Outstanding Contribution to Mental Health Award. A big deal for young psychologists like me. The newsletter came in while I was drinking my coffee, skimming through my emails before my first session. And there it was. The list. The names, but not mine. Instead, under Research and Outreach Program, it read, Eric Wilson. Again. My chest tightened. My heart pounded. For a second I thought I was seeing things, that maybe it was an old email or a typo. But it wasn't. The same outreach project I had started, organized, and executed, the one I'd poured hours into, had been credited to him. I dropped the mug. It shattered on the tile floor, spilling coffee like blood across my shoes. I went straight to Dr. Melendez's office. He looked up, startled, when I opened the door. Kim, is everything okay? No, it's not, I said, my voice low but trembling. Why is Eric being recognized for my project? He frowned. Your project? Yes, the Community Outreach Initiative. I designed it, I ran the sessions, I gathered the data. Eric only attended 2 events, one of which he left halfway through. Dr. Melendez sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. I understand you're upset, Kim, but Eric submitted the final report. His name was on all the materials. If you wanted recognition, you should have ensured proper authorship. The air left my lungs. You're saying this is my fault? I'm saying documentation matters. In this field, credit follows paperwork. I wanted to scream. Instead, I walked out, because I knew if I stayed, I'd say something I couldn't take back. That afternoon, I locked myself in my car during lunch break, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. My phone buzzed. A text from Chloe. Saw the clinic's post. Guess Eric's really killing it, huh? I stared at the screen, the words blurring through my tears. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. The message wasn't about Eric. It was about me. She wanted me to feel small again. But instead, something inside me shifted. For the first time, my anger wasn't consuming me. It was sharpening me. That night, I went home and pulled out the old hard drive I'd kept from my grad school days. The one with every draft, every paper, every signed document. I found the original project proposal, complete with my signature and time-stamped revisions. I found emails between Eric and me discussing logistics, proof that he had merely helped. I saved everything to a new folder called Evidence. Then, for the first time since it all began, I didn't cry. I planned. Still, the breaking point wasn't just about stolen credit or public humiliation. It came from what followed. The whispers, the pity, the quiet isolation that seeps into every corner of your life after you've been wronged. At lunch, people stopped sitting next to me. My friends texted less. When they did, it was awkwardly polite, as if betrayal was contagious. Once I overheard 2 coworkers outside the restroom. "Kim's still bitter about Eric," one said. "Can you blame her? He moved on." "She's stuck," the other replied. I pressed my palm to the cold wall and took a deep breath. That was the moment I realized forgiveness was overrated. Weeks passed, but something in me had hardened. I stopped smiling out of habit. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped trying to make people comfortable with my pain. Instead, I poured everything into my work. My work. Late nights turned into early mornings. I began developing my own therapy program focused on self-worth and betrayal trauma, a subject I now understood far too well. I worked in silence, in secret, just like before. But this time, I documented everything, every version, every note, every meeting, because this time, no one was stealing what was mine. Then came the final straw, an email from the clinic director announcing Eric's promotion. He was to lead the new emotional recovery department, using the framework I had presented months ago. I froze, staring at the screen. My name wasn't mentioned anywhere. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about one stolen paper or one relationship. This was a pattern. Men like Eric, people like Chloe, they thrived by taking from others who were too kind to fight back. I wasn't going to be one of them anymore. I remember sitting on my couch that night, the only light coming from my laptop screen, a storm raging outside. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room, and for the first time, I spoke out loud, to myself. No more being quiet. The words felt strange, heavy, powerful. I opened a blank document and started typing. Not a research paper, not a therapy plan, a letter, to the board. I detailed every instance of Eric's plagiarism, every stolen credit, every manipulated project. I attached the evidence, and at the end, I wrote one sentence that would change everything. If integrity means anything to this clinic, you will review this matter before I take it to the Florida Psychological Association. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The next morning, the storm had cleared, both outside and within me. Days later, an internal investigation began. Eric avoided eye contact in the halls. Chloe's number called twice. I ignored it. Dr. Melendez barely spoke to me. The silence was no longer suffocating. It was mine. For the first time in months, I felt a strange calm, the kind that comes not from revenge itself, but from reclaiming your voice. My breaking point had come and gone, but instead of shattering me, it had reforged me. The next chapter of my life wasn't about survival anymore. It was about taking back everything they'd tried to bury, and turning it into something so brilliant, they'd have no choice but to see me. When the clinic's internal investigation began, I thought it would feel like relief, like finally justice was on its way. But instead, what came next was silence, the kind that drowns you slowly. No one congratulated me for speaking up. No one even looked me in the eye. The same coworkers who once shared lunch with me now whispered behind their coffee cups. My office door stayed closed most days, not because I wanted it that way, but because the air outside felt heavy with judgment. That's what people don't tell you about doing the right thing. It doesn't make you a hero. It makes you a target. At first, I tried to keep my head down. I told myself it was temporary, that truth would soon set me free. But every day felt like walking through a hallway of ghosts. Conversations stopped when I entered a room. Emails were ignored. My supervisor avoided assigning me new clients. One afternoon, I went to refill my coffee, and as I turned the corner, I heard it. "She's just bitter," one of the nurses said. "She couldn't handle losing him." Another voice replied, "Yeah, now she's trying to ruin his career. It's pathetic." They didn't notice I was there until I dropped the spoon in my cup. The clang echoed in the break room. They froze, faces paling, but I didn't give them the satisfaction of confrontation. I just walked away. By the time I reached my office, my hands were shaking. I closed the door, leaned against it, and let out a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Pathetic," I whispered to myself. "That's what they see." The truth was, part of me did feel pathetic. Not because of what I'd done, but because I'd expected people to care. My clients began canceling appointments. Some said it was scheduling conflicts. Others just didn't call back. I knew why. Word had spread that I was emotionally compromised, that my judgment might be clouded. It's funny. I was the same woman who had helped dozens of people rebuild after heartbreak. But now that I was the one recovering, suddenly my credibility was gone. For the first time in my career, I doubted my purpose. At night, I'd lie in bed replaying every choice I'd made. Should I have kept quiet? Should I have let Eric take the credit and moved on? Should I have smiled and played along like Chloe always did? The questions ate at me until I barely recognized myself. Then one day, I opened my email and found a message from Dr. Melendez. "Kim, the board has concluded the internal review. Due to insufficient evidence of intent, no further action will be taken against Dr. Wilson. We ask that you focus on your professional duties and avoid unnecessary conflict moving forward." I stared at the screen, my heart sinking. Insufficient evidence. All those late nights gathering documents, all those hours spent writing, every ounce of courage I'd mustered, dismissed in one cold sentence. My vision blurred as tears filled my eyes. I read it again and again, but the words didn't change. In that moment, I wasn't angry. I was empty. I didn't go to work the next day. I didn't go the day after either. For the first time in months, I sat in my apartment without purpose. The walls felt closer. The air felt thicker. I turned on my laptop, opened a blank page, and typed 3 words. Who am I? The question haunted me, because I realized I had no answer outside of my work, my reputation, and the approval of others. Everything I'd built my identity on had crumbled, and I was left staring at the ruins. Days blurred together. I'd wake up, stare at the ceiling, force myself to shower, then scroll through social media until the noise in my head got too loud. And then, one afternoon, I saw it. A picture of Eric and Chloe at a charity gala, smiling, dressed in black tie elegance. The caption read, "The power couple of the year, changing lives through empathy and innovation." I felt something snap inside me. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was a bitter, burning rage that pulsed through my veins like electricity. "They're stealing everything," I whispered. "Even my story." That night, I walked to the beach again. The same place where I'd first broken down after catching them together. The waves were violent this time, crashing hard against the shore, spraying salt into my face. I screamed into the wind. Not words, just a raw, unfiltered sound that came from somewhere deep, somewhere I didn't know existed. When it was over, I sank to my knees, my body trembling. And that's when I saw her, an old woman sitting on a bench, watching me quietly. Her silver hair glowed under the streetlight. She didn't say anything at first, just waited until I caught my breath. "Rough night?" she finally asked. I laughed weakly. "You could say that." She smiled. "It passes, you know, the ache, the anger. It always does." "I don't want it to pass," I admitted. "It's the only thing keeping me going." The woman nodded slowly, her gaze distant. "Then use it. but don't let it use you. Those words lingered long after she walked away. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept. And when I woke, I felt something new. Not peace, but purpose. If the system wouldn't recognize my worth, I'd build one that did. If people refused to see the truth, I'd make it impossible for them to look away. If Eric and Chloe wanted the spotlight, I'd outshine them until they disappeared in my glow. I returned to work the next week, quiet and composed. My coworkers stared as I walked past, but I didn't care. I wasn't there to please anyone anymore. During my lunch break, I pulled out my notebook and began sketching ideas, programs, workshops, online courses for women dealing with betrayal trauma. If the clinic wouldn't support me, I'd build my own platform. It was a spark at first, just an idea scribbled between therapy notes and grocery lists. But it grew, slowly, like a heartbeat returning after a long silence. That night, I bought a domain name, reclaimher.com. I didn't know then that it would change everything. But I did know this. I was done waiting for justice. From now on, I'd create my own. The first time I saw the Reclaim Her logo on my laptop screen, I didn't realize what it would become. It was a plain white page with a simple tagline: "Healing isn't weakness." But for me, it felt like the start of something sacred. It wasn't about revenge anymore. Not fully. It was about reclaiming myself from the people who had tried to silence me. I spent every night after work building the site, writing articles about self-worth, betrayal, and recovery. I used everything I knew as a psychologist and everything I'd lived through as a woman scorned. I didn't hide behind my title or credentials. I wrote as me, Kim Jackson, the woman who was broken and got back up. At first, the site was small. A few views, a few comments, women sharing their pain in whispers. My husband cheated and blamed me. My boss took credit for my work. My family said I was dramatic. Each message felt like a mirror. I saw myself in every line. So I answered them, personally. Every night, I wrote back, reminding strangers that they weren't crazy, that they weren't weak, that they weren't alone. Within weeks, Reclaim Her started growing. Hundreds of visits turned into thousands. And one morning, while sipping coffee at my kitchen counter, I got an email notification. Subject: Feature request. Reclaim Her for the Modern Mind podcast. I blinked. Twice. The Modern Mind was a popular psychology podcast run by Dr. Lila Torres, a woman I'd admired since college. I opened the email. Hi, Kim. I've been following your work on Reclaim Her. Your perspective on trauma and resilience is deeply powerful. Would you be open to joining me for an interview? My hands trembled. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, speechless. I thought about Eric and Chloe, about the clinic, about every whispered insult and every cold shoulder. They'd tried to bury me. But here I was, being invited into the light. The day of the podcast, I almost didn't go. My nerves were wild, my palms sweaty, my heart thundering. I looked in the mirror, straightened my blazer, and told myself quietly, "You belong here." Dr. Torres greeted me with a warm smile and calm eyes. "Kim," she said as we sat in the studio, "your story, your journey, it's incredibly raw. What gave you the strength to speak out when the world tried to silence you?" For a second, I froze. Then I smiled softly. Because silence was killing me more than the truth ever could. She nodded. "You turned your pain into purpose. That's power." When the episode aired a week later, my inbox exploded. Messages poured in from all over the country. Women, men, even teens, sharing their stories, thanking me for giving words to their feelings. "You made me realize I'm not broken. I left my toxic job because of your story." I finally reported what happened to me. Thank you. Each one felt like a piece of my shattered heart being glued back together. But with attention came backlash. Eric texted me one night. So this is what you're doing now? Playing the victim for views? I stared at the message for a long time before replying. No. I'm teaching people how to survive people like you. He didn't respond after that. Still, his words lingered. There was a part of me, small, wounded, that still wanted validation. That still wanted to be seen as the woman who had once loved him, not the one he'd destroyed. But that part of me grew smaller with every success. By the end of the month, I was invited to speak at a women's empowerment conference in Miami. I stood on stage in front of 300 people, lights blinding, microphone trembling in my hands. My name is Kim Jackson, I began, and for a long time, I thought silence was strength. I thought forgiving those who hurt me meant healing. But I was wrong. Healing isn't about staying quiet. It's about choosing yourself when no one else will. The room was still. I saw tears glisten in strangers' eyes. When I finished, the applause was thunderous, not the polite kind, but the kind that shook your soul. I walked off stage shaking, heart pounding, not from fear but from realization. I wasn't broken anymore. I was becoming something else entirely. After the conference, Dr. Torres called me again. Kim, she said, you have something special. Authenticity. People trust you because you don't talk at them, you talk with them. Have you thought about expanding Reclaim Her into a counseling platform? I hesitated. That's big. I don't have funding. Or a team, she chuckled. Start with yourself. People follow truth, not teams. That night, I stayed awake till 3 a.m. sketching out plans. Virtual workshops, online therapy sessions, free resources. I even reached out to other psychologists I knew who had faced similar experiences. To my surprise, several agreed to help. Within 3 months, Reclaim Her wasn't just a blog. It was a movement. And then, one morning, I got an email from the Florida Psychological Association. Subject: Congratulations. Reclaim Her selected for Mental Health Innovation Grant. I gasped. My project, had been chosen for a $50,000 grant to expand digital access to trauma recovery programs. I sat there at my desk, tears streaming down my face. The same institution that had once ignored my complaint was now funding my mission. I couldn't help but laugh, not out of mockery, but out of poetic satisfaction. Life had a strange way of coming full circle. But even as my career flourished, part of me knew I hadn't reached the final act yet. Because healing doesn't mean forgetting. And forgiveness doesn't mean letting people escape accountability. I hadn't heard from Chloe in months, until one evening. She appeared at one of my workshops. She looked different, older, worn down, regret written in every line of her face. Kim, she said quietly after the session. I needed to see you. I froze. Why? Her eyes watered. Because Eric left. He used me too. And I wanted to say I'm sorry. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who'd betrayed me now looked like a ghost of herself. And in that moment, I realized something profound. She wasn't my villain anymore. She was just another casualty of his selfishness. I nodded slowly. I accept your apology, I said. But I can't carry your guilt for you. She wiped her tears. I know. As she walked away, I felt lighter. Not because I forgave her, but because I no longer needed revenge to feel whole. That night, I stood by my window, city lights reflecting off the glass, thinking about how far I'd come. The woman who had once begged for recognition now commanded it effortlessly. The one who'd been silenced now had thousands listening. And the best part, I'd built it all on my own terms. This wasn't just discovery, it was power. Real, quiet, unstoppable power. The first real taste of success didn't make me reckless. It made me deliberate. I knew what I had to do next. The world now saw me as the founder of Reclaim Her, the woman who turned pain into purpose. But I wasn't finished. Not while Eric was still walking around, wearing a stolen crown built from my ideas. Justice wasn't loud. It was quiet, methodical, and patient. So I began to set the stage. The Florida Psychological Association's grant came with a condition. I had to host a large public seminar on trauma recovery, sponsored by their board. It was to feature various professionals in the mental health field. That's when an idea took root. I opened the list of suggested speakers. And there it was. Dr. Eric Wilson. For a moment, I just stared at the name. The irony almost made me laugh. I took a deep breath and typed my response to the board. I'd be happy to have Dr. Wilson as a speaker. I think it would be meaningful to showcase a range of professional approaches. I smiled as I hit send. They didn't need to know that I was no longer the woman who broke coffee mugs over betrayal. They were inviting him to my stage, and this time, I was the one holding the microphone. Over the next 2 months, I prepared everything down to the smallest detail. I curated every topic, every panel discussion, every presentation slide. I made sure the theme, authenticity and healing, would make Eric's words taste like ash in his mouth. I wanted the stage to expose him, not with accusations but with contrast. While I worked, I played his old interviews in the background. His voice made my skin crawl, but I studied him like a chess player studies their opponent's past moves. I learned every phrase he used, every story he exaggerated. The man hadn't changed. He was still charming, polished, and hollow. One night, I got a message from the board secretary. "Kim, would you like to co-present the opening keynote with Dr. Wilson?" I almost dropped my phone. Co-present? A year ago, I would have declined out of fear. But this wasn't a year ago. I typed back, "Absolutely. Let's make it happen." In the weeks leading up to the event, my days were a blur of logistics and press calls. Reclaim Her had grown into something I could barely recognize. My story had been covered in Psych Today, and a national magazine wanted an interview. But no matter how far I'd come, there was always that part of me that remembered the silence of my old office, the whispers in the hallway, the sting of being dismissed. Now, I was going to walk into a room full of those same people, and they'd have to listen. The morning of the seminar, I arrived early at the Miami Convention Center. Rows of chairs glimmered under stage lights, banners with my name printed across them. I walked up to the podium, feeling the hum of the microphone vibrate under my fingers. A year ago, I was begging for recognition. Now they were all here to hear me. Eric arrived late, of course. I spotted him from across the room. Same confident walk, same smug smile. "Kim," he said, approaching me like we were old friends. "Long time no see." I forced a polite smile. "Eric, glad you could make it." He chuckled. "I see you've been busy. Reclaimer, huh? Impressive branding. Looks like you finally found your niche." His words dripped with condescension, but I refused to flinch. "And you finally found a reason to show up on time. My stage." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. That was victory number 1. When the event began, the audience filled the hall. Hundreds of professionals, students, and media personnel. Eric spoke first. His speech was polished, rehearsed, dripping with charm as always. He talked about empathy and leadership, about guiding patients through their darkest moments. It was all an act, and yet, they clapped. I waited until the applause died down before stepping forward. "Thank you, Dr. Wilson," I said, taking the microphone. "That was a fascinating perspective, but I want to talk about something different today. The importance of integrity in mental health." Eric's smile faltered. As I spoke, I looked directly at him. Not accusing, not angry, just calm. I told the story of a young woman whose work was stolen, whose voice was silenced, and how that betrayal became the seed for change. Every word hung heavy in the air. The audience leaned forward, their faces tense with empathy. Eric avoided my eyes. When I finished, the room was silent for a beat, and then applause erupted. It wasn't polite this time. It was thunderous. After the keynote, people surrounded me, colleagues, journalists, even board members. They congratulated me, quoted my words, asked for interviews. Eric stood on the edge of the crowd, ignored and uncomfortable. For once, no one was listening to him. That was victory number 2. A week later, the event footage went viral. Clips of my speech flooded social media, accompanied by captions like, "Psychologist Kim Jackson delivers powerful truth on resilience. Her story is a masterclass in grace and growth." Even The Modern Mind reposted it, tagging Reclaim Her. Meanwhile, someone noticed that Eric's published work closely mirrored parts of my original outreach project. A journalist contacted me for clarification. I didn't have to say much. I just shared the archived documents I'd already made public months ago. Within days, the internet did what institutions wouldn't. It held him accountable. He lost credibility. Sponsors pulled back. The clinic distanced itself. I didn't have to destroy him. He did it himself when faced with the truth. The day I got the news of his suspension from the clinic, I sat in silence for a long time. There was no joy, no celebration, just peace. The setup had worked, but not because I'd orchestrated chaos. It worked because I had turned my pain into proof, and that proof spoke louder than vengeance ever could. That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, staring at the woman I had become. My reflection looked back, steady, certain, untouchable. I whispered, "This is only the beginning." Because it wasn't about taking Eric down anymore. It was about lifting myself higher than he could ever reach. And I wasn't done yet. When the news of Eric's suspension hit the professional networks, it spread like wildfire. Emails, LinkedIn posts, and gossip threads all carried his name, but not with the admiration he once commanded. Words like plagiarism, ethical breach, and fabricated research appeared next to his smiling headshots. For months, I had envisioned this moment, the collapse of his carefully constructed image. But when it actually happened, I didn't cheer. I simply sat at my desk, reading the headlines, and felt a deep, quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. This was justice, not explosive, not cruel, just inevitable. That morning, I received a message from Dr. Melendez, the same supervisor who had once told me to avoid unnecessary conflict. "Kim, I wanted to personally reach out. I saw the article. I think the board owes you an apology and recognition for your contributions." I smirked. Now he wanted to talk. I replied politely. "Thank you, Dr. Melendez. The truth always finds its way out. I've moved on to more fulfilling work now." And that was true. My days were filled with purpose, not revenge. But every small victory still felt like one more weight lifted from my shoulders. The week after the scandal broke, I was invited to deliver a keynote at a national psychology summit in Chicago. The theme was Voices of Change. They wanted me to talk about resilience and authenticity. I couldn't have scripted it better myself. As I walked into the massive convention hall, I saw faces from every part of my journey. Colleagues who had doubted me, mentors who had ignored me, and strangers who now treated me like an icon. Eric wasn't there, of course. He had reportedly taken an indefinite leave from the field. Some said he left town. Others whispered he was seeking therapy. A poetic twist, really. But his absence didn't matter. His ghost was still in the room, and I was finally free of its shadow. When I took the stage, my hands were steady. The spotlight was blinding, but I didn't shy away from it. "My name is Kim Jackson," I began. "A year ago, I thought my career was over. I thought speaking up would destroy everything I had worked for. But I was wrong." I paused, letting the silence fill with curiosity. Speaking up didn't destroy me. It rebuilt me. It revealed who truly stood for truth and who hid behind the illusion of success. The crowd was quiet, captivated. I saw cameras flashing, people nodding. Some even wiped tears. I smiled softly. There was a time when someone I trusted told me I'd never succeed without them. But I stand here today to tell you, you don't need validation to be valuable. You don't need permission to rise. Applause erupted, thunderous and emotional. It wasn't just for me. It was for everyone who had ever been silenced, dismissed, underestimated. After the speech, I stepped backstage, breathless. My phone buzzed with messages. Among them was one that stopped me cold. It was from Chloe. "I saw your talk. You were incredible. You deserve all of this. I wanted to say, thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Thank you, Chloe. I wish you peace. It was strange. The woman I'd once hated was now part of the closure I never knew I needed. That evening, I attended the summit's gala dinner. People toasted to my success, journalists asked for interviews, and even sponsors wanted to collaborate with Reclaim Her. In one surreal moment, a representative from a major publishing house approached me. "Ms. Jackson," she said with a warm smile, "we'd love to offer you a book deal, a memoir perhaps, something about your journey, turning pain into power." I blinked, almost laughing. A book? Yes, your story could help thousands, millions even. I shook her hand, smiling. Let's do it. That night in my hotel room, I stared at the Chicago skyline, glittering like a promise, and felt tears fill my eyes. Not of sadness, not even of triumph, but of release. For the first time, the future didn't scare me. It thrilled me. 2 weeks later, I received a letter in the mail, official, stamped, and oddly familiar. It was from the Florida Psychological Association. "We would like to formally apologize for our previous inaction regarding your complaint. Upon review of the new evidence, we recognize the integrity of your initial claims. We would also like to extend an invitation for you to join our ethics advisory board." I laughed. Loud, genuine, unstoppable laughter. The same people who once dismissed me now wanted me to advise them. I signed the acceptance letter that very night, and when I mailed it back the next morning, I whispered, full circle. A few days later, I found myself back in Miami, walking past the old clinic building. The glass doors were the same, the nameplates the same, but I wasn't. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of new faces, young interns, eager and hopeful. One of them looked up and waved politely, not knowing who I was. I smiled, waved back, and kept walking. I didn't need to go inside. I had outgrown that place, and everyone in it. That night, I hosted a live session on Reclaim, her called The Strength of Letting Go. Thousands tuned in. I spoke honestly, without bitterness. Sometimes, I said, revenge doesn't look like ruining someone. It looks like living so fully that their betrayal becomes irrelevant. The comment section exploded with hearts and messages of support. I smiled into the camera. And if you're watching this, if you've ever been told you're not enough, not strong enough, not capable enough, I'm living proof they were wrong. When I ended the live stream, I sat back in my chair, closed my laptop, and looked around my apartment. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. My phone buzzed again. A notification from my assistant. "Congrats, Kim. We just hit 1 million followers." I laughed softly, wiping away a tear. This wasn't luck. This was justice, earned one quiet victory at a time. I walked to my window, watching the city lights flicker against the night sky. For the first time, I realized the strike was never about destroying Eric. It was about reclaiming my own narrative. I whispered to myself, almost in disbelief. I made it. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. Because the woman I was before had been broken by betrayal. But the woman I had become? She was unstoppable. It started with one headline. Dr. Kim Jackson, the psychologist who reclaimed her voice and helped millions find theirs. Then came another. From betrayal to breakthrough, the woman behind Reclaim Her speaks out. Every morning, I woke to new articles, new interviews, new podcast requests. But this time, it wasn't about scandal. It was about impact. My voice, once dismissed as inconvenient, was now inspiring a movement. It wasn't fame I felt. It was validation, a justice that didn't need to shout. It just existed. When my book, The Weight of Silence, hit the shelves, I didn't expect the response it received. Within a week, it climbed to the top of the psychology and self-help charts. The messages poured in faster than I could read them. Your story helped me leave an abusive marriage. I quit a toxic job because of you. I'm studying psychology now. You changed my life. Every message was like a heartbeat, proof that my pain had transformed into purpose. But what came next was something even I couldn't have planned. 2 months after the book's release, Good Morning America invited me for a live interview. Standing backstage under the blinding studio lights, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Sleek hair, calm smile, eyes no longer haunted by the past. A year ago, I was crying over betrayal. Now, I was mic'd up, waiting to be introduced as a thought leader. Please welcome Dr. Kim Jackson, the founder of Reclaim Her, author, and national voice for resilience. The applause hit like a wave. I stepped onto the stage, heart racing but steady. The host smiled warmly. Kim, your story has touched millions. What would you say to the woman watching right now who feels broken? I took a breath, steady and slow. I'd tell her that brokenness isn't the end. It's just the moment before you rebuild. The world tried to convince me I wasn't enough, and I believed it for a while. But healing isn't quiet, it's powerful, and once you claim your story, no one can use it against you. The host nodded, moved. That's beautiful. It's true, I said simply. The audience erupted into applause again. And somewhere in that sound, that chorus of belief, I found something I hadn't even realized I was missing. Forgiveness, not for Eric, not even for Chloe, for myself. Later that night, as I scrolled through social media, I noticed a familiar name trending, Eric. Someone had found his old interviews, the ones where he spoke about leadership and compassion. People were now commenting under them, exposing his hypocrisy. Funny how this guy plagiarized and gaslit his own partner. Maybe he should take a page out of Kim's book. Literally. For a moment, I stared at the screen, torn. The old me would have smiled, but now I just sighed. Revenge didn't feel the way I thought it would. It wasn't fire or fury. It was clarity. The storm had passed, and all that was left was peace. The next day, I visited a high school to speak about mental health awareness. I watched a room full of teenage girls, anxious, brilliant, hopeful, hanging on to every word. One girl raised her hand timidly. Dr. Jackson, how did you keep going when everyone doubted you? I smiled, because I realized their doubt wasn't about me. It was about them. People fear what they don't understand, and sometimes they try to destroy what reminds them of their own weakness. But once you stop needing their approval, they lose all their power. The girl's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. When she hugged me after the session, I realized this was my legacy. Not the book, not the fame. This. Being the voice I once needed. That evening, I returned home to an email from a production studio. We'd love to adapt The Weight of Silence into a docuseries. We believe your story could inspire millions more. I sat there stunned. A year ago, I couldn't even get Eric to acknowledge my work. Now Hollywood wanted to turn my pain into art. I whispered to myself, smiling. Funny how the universe keeps receipts. A few weeks later, I attended a charity gala in Miami, the same city where everything had fallen apart. As I stood by the balcony, watching the waves shimmer under the moonlight, a voice behind me said, Dr. Jackson? I turned. It was Dr. Torres, my mentor from the modern mind. You've come a long way, she said, smiling. You've become exactly what this field needed. Unfiltered truth. Thank you, I said quietly. I think I needed the pain to find that truth, she nodded. That's how the best voices are born. Through fire. Toward the end of the night, as I was about to leave, a familiar face appeared by the exit. Eric. For a second, my heart stopped. He looked thinner, older, the arrogance gone from his face. Kim, he said softly. I wasn't sure you'd even talk to me. I met his gaze. You're right. I almost didn't, he nodded. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I studied him. The man who once made me doubt my worth now looked like a stranger. I don't hate you, Eric, I said finally. I just don't need your apology to move on. His shoulders sagged, relief and regret tangled in his expression. You really did win, didn't you? I smiled faintly. No, I just stopped playing your game. And with that, I turned and walked away. That night, I drove home in silence. Windows down, wind tangling my hair. I thought about every moment, the heartbreak, the silence, the rebirth. I realized something profound. Revenge had never been about punishing him. It had been about reclaiming me. When people told me my silence was weakness, I proved that silence can echo louder than screams, if it's filled with purpose. And now, the world was listening. It's strange how silence changes when peace finally fills it. A year ago, my silence was heavy, suffocating, like a room with no windows. Now it feels wide open, like standing at the edge of the ocean. The same quiet that once haunted me has become the sound of freedom. I often think about how quickly everything changed, how pain can turn into power when you refuse to stay broken. I used to measure success by validation, by applause, by someone saying you did well. Now, success means waking up and liking the woman staring back at me in the mirror. The past few months after the docuseries release were a blur. The weight of silence was streamed in over 50 countries. Emails poured in from strangers across the world, doctors, teachers, single parents, and teenagers who felt seen for the first time. But with recognition came reflection. I wasn't the same woman who had once begged Eric to notice her, to believe in her ideas, to see her worth. That version of me was gone. In her place stood a woman who had built something no one could take away. Not her peace, not her name, not her purpose. Still, I won't lie. There were nights when the fame felt overwhelming, when the praise sounded too much like noise. I had spent so long surviving chaos that calmness sometimes felt foreign. One night, I sat on my apartment balcony in Miami, watching the city lights ripple against the waves. I thought about all the versions of myself I'd been. The naive intern, the silenced employee, the wounded woman, the phoenix rising from her own ashes. And for the first time I whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone else, to her, to the broken version of me who refused to quit. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a global women's empowerment conference in New York. The same city where I once felt invisible was now paying to hear my story. As I waited backstage, I could hear the host introducing me. Our next speaker turned betrayal into brilliance. Please welcome Dr. Kim Jackson. The applause was thunderous. I walked onto the stage, not with nerves this time, but with grace. The kind of confidence that comes from knowing you've already survived the worst. I took a breath and began. I used to think success was about proving people wrong, but now I know true success is about proving yourself right. It's about realizing you were never the problem. The crowd grew silent. I could feel them listening, really listening. When I lost everything, I thought I'd never recover, but that loss gave me clarity. It showed me who I was without everyone else's noise. And that woman, the quiet one, the hurt one, she turned out to be stronger than I ever imagined. The applause that followed wasn't just sound, it was understanding. After the speech, I was approached by women from all walks of life. Entrepreneurs, nurses, stay-at-home mothers. Each one had a story of being dismissed, disrespected, or forgotten. A young woman named Aisha hugged me with tears in her eyes. "You made me believe it's okay to start over," she said. "I filed for divorce last month because of you." I held her hand and said, "Good. Starting over isn't failure. It's freedom." Moments like that reminded me why I'd chosen this path. Revenge had been the spark, but healing was the fire that kept burning. Months passed. My company, Reclaim Her, expanded into mental health initiatives for underserved communities. We opened counseling centers, partnered with universities, and started mentorship programs for young women. Every time I walked through those doors and saw the people we helped, I felt the universe whisper, "This is what it was all for." But one afternoon, as I was leaving the office, I saw an envelope on my desk. No return address, just my name written neatly on the front. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Kim, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I wanted to thank you. Your story gave me courage. I was once like you, silenced and ashamed, Watching you rebuild your life made me believe I could do the same. You don't know me, but you saved me. With gratitude, M. I sat there for a long time, staring at the letter, tears slipping down my cheeks. That was the moment I realized my story wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to every person who needed proof that pain can be a beginning, not an end. Sometimes I still catch glimpses of my past, in old buildings, in old songs, in fleeting moments of déjà vu. And though I don't miss it, I honor it. Because without it, I wouldn't have known what resilience truly feels like. Forgiveness came quietly. Not in one moment, but in a series of small realizations, like how I could hear Eric's name without bitterness now, or how I could revisit those memories without shaking. He no longer lived rent-free in my mind. I had evicted him with peace. On the anniversary of the seminar where I'd reclaimed my voice, I stood by the ocean, wind pulling at my hair, waves crashing against the shore. A memory flashed. Me, sitting in my car outside the clinic a year ago, crying, humiliated, hopeless. Now I smiled softly. You made it, I whispered to that memory. Not just out of the pain, but into purpose. I closed my eyes and let the ocean drown out everything else. This was what healing looked like. Not revenge, not validation, but peace that didn't depend on anyone else. When I got home, I sat at my desk and began writing again. Not a book this time, but a letter. Dear future me, never forget that silence is not weakness. It's power waiting for the right moment to speak. Never shrink yourself to fit their comfort. Never dim your light to ease their insecurity. You are proof that broken things can still shine. Love, Kim. I folded it neatly and placed it in my journal. Then I turned off the lights, curled up on the couch, and let the peace settle deep into my bones. The war was over. And this time, I didn't need to win, because I'd already become the woman I was fighting to be. It's quiet tonight. The kind of quiet that feels earned. I'm sitting by my window, city lights reflecting off the glass, thinking about how every ending once looked like a beginning in disguise. A year ago, I would have filled this silence with doubt, replaying every cruel word, every moment I was underestimated. Now I fill it with gratitude, because every scar led me here. This isn't the story of a woman who got revenge. It's the story of a woman who got free. The Reclaim Her Foundation now spans 3 countries. We've opened community centers for women escaping toxic workplaces, abusive homes, and broken confidence. We train them, mentor them, help them rebuild careers and lives. Every time one of them walks out smiling, I see a reflection of the woman I used to be. Last week, I was invited to give a closing talk at the Global Resilience Summit in London. The same people who once silenced me now quoted my work, studied my methods, shared my words on screens 10 feet tall. As I walked backstage, a young volunteer handed me a bouquet. Dr. Jackson, she said shyly. I read your book when I was in college. It helped me report my boss. It changed my life. I smiled at her, my throat tightening. Thank you for telling me. That's why I do this. She hugged me impulsively. You're the reason I believe women can be powerful and kind at the same time. I walked onto the stage holding those flowers. Not as decoration, but as proof that kindness is never weakness, no matter who tries to weaponize it. When the applause faded, I began my final talk of the night. I used to believe revenge meant making someone else hurt as much as I did, I said, the microphone steady in my hand. But revenge isn't about destruction. It's about reclamation. It's the quiet act of saying, you no longer control how my story ends. The room was still. I am not here because I fought harder. I continued. I'm here because I chose myself when no one else did. As I spoke, I saw faces soften, tears glint under the spotlights. I realized then that this wasn't just my story anymore. It was a mirror for everyone who'd ever been dismissed, betrayed, or underestimated. When I finished, the entire auditorium stood up. The applause didn't sound like noise. It sounded like healing. Back in Miami, I visited my childhood home for the first time in years. My mother greeted me at the door, her eyes filling with pride and a hint of apology. "You've done so much, Kim," she whispered, hugging me tightly. "I'm sorry I ever doubted you." I smiled against her shoulder. "It's okay, Mom, you don't have to be sorry. You just have to be here now." That night, we ate dinner together. Simple food, soft laughter, the smell of candles instead of tension. It struck me then how life always gives you two choices. You can stay bitter, or you can build something better. A few days later, I stood again by the ocean, my favorite place to think. The sky was streaked with gold and violet, waves brushing the shore like forgiveness in motion. I took out my phone and started recording a message for my followers, one last story for my channel. "Hey everyone, it's Kim. This might be my last story for a while, or maybe just a new chapter." I smiled into the lens, wind tugging at my hair. When this all began, I thought I'd lost everything. My job, my reputation, my faith in people, but losing everything gave me the one thing I never had before: myself. I looked at the waves, then back at the camera. To anyone watching this, who's sitting in the middle of their storm, I want you to remember this. Sometimes the universe breaks your heart to rebuild your soul. Sometimes the betrayal that wrecks you is the one that saves you. I paused, voice softening, and if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too deserve respect and unconditional love. I lowered the phone and whispered the words I'd been saving all this time, because sometimes the power we fear we've lost is the very thing we find in silence. The tide rushed closer, kissing my feet as if sealing a promise. For years, I'd tried to prove my worth to people who could never see it. Now I knew worth isn't given, it's realized. As the sun disappeared into the horizon, I sat on the sand and let the sound of the ocean carry me back through time. The girl who cried in her car, the woman who rebuilt from nothing, the leader who now used her voice for others. All of them were me. All of them were necessary. I took a deep breath and said softly, "You did it, Kim. You kept your promise to yourself." The world didn't owe me closure. I had written my own. When I got home, I placed my old ID badge from the modern mind in a small wooden box, along with the letter from M, the thank you notes from my team, and the key to my first office. Not trophies, not reminders, just memories of the journey. Then I wrote one last line in my journal. "Revenge may start with fire, but healing always ends in light." I closed the notebook, feeling the final weight of the story leave my chest. Tomorrow, I'd wake up, drink my coffee, and start writing again. Not out of anger, but out of peace. Because the best kind of revenge isn't success. It's serenity. And I had finally earned mine. I turned off the light, watching the city glow beyond my window, and smiled one last time. "Have you ever risen from something that was meant to destroy you?" I whispered. "Tell me your story in the comments. I'll be listening." The screen faded to black. But my story, our story, would live on.